initial study permit outside Canada. So this is targeting very much students who are brand new to Canada, brand new to Acadia, and are in the process of applying for their study permits outside of Canada. If you happen to be a student who does not fall in that category, please contact the International Law Center and we would be happy to assist you on your study permit process. So without further ado, let's begin our session. For me. There we go. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at the requirements for studying in Canada. Of course, we're going to be looking at the study permit and the temporary resident visa, two very important documents there. And we're going to understand what the differences are between them. We're also going to be looking at how to apply for your study permit and actually getting the study permit itself, which is very different from what you may think. We're going to be looking at processing times as well. We're going to be looking at working in Canada, which is tied very much to your study permit. There's a series of questions that normally students ask, and we're going to be addressing that. And hopefully with time, we will have an opportunity to open up the floor to students to ask us questions, whether it's online or if you want to include your question in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask us a question. So what are the requirements to study here in Canada? So if you're in a program at Acadia that is more than 6 months in length and duration, you're going to need a study permit. You're going to need to apply for it and you're going to need to have one approved. Okay, and if approved, of course, you're going to be also receiving automatically a document that allows you to enter the country. And this could be a temporary resident visa, or it could be an electronic travel authorization. And this will be automatically issued to you. You don't have to apply for it. And what you receive will be dependent on your citizenship. So if you are from a visa required country, you will be receiving a temporary resident visa, and that will be a sticker in your passport. And of course, an electronic travel authorization is, you'll never see it. It is tied to your passport. Your official study permit then will be issued at the port of entry. So the actual permit itself is not mailed to you back home or sent to you digitally. It's actually given to you by a Canadian Border Services officer when you first arrive in Canada. So what are the differences between study permits and study visas? And I know a lot of students make the reference to study visa. The proper terminology to use is actually a study permit versus a temporary resident visa. And the reason for that, it's very important because when you're asking questions about these permits, the individuals on the other end, such as myself, need to know exactly which permit you're referring to so that we can provide you with the best advice. So your study permit essentially is a document that looks like this, as you can see on the screen here. And what that document essentially does, it gives you that permission to study and also work in Canada, believe it or not. And because of that, it issues you your legal status in Canada. So all of you will be hopefully having acquired this study permit and becoming students here in Canada. Keep in mind that, as I mentioned, it also acts as a work permit in a way. It's not called a work permit, but if you look at your study permit very closely when you receive it at the port of entry, you will see that there are comments on the bottom that indicate your ability to work on and off campus. Your temporary resident visa looks like this document right here, and it is glued to your passport. So it's something that the officer actually places in your passport. So if your study permit is approved and you are from a visa required country, you will be prompted to send your passport to the nearest Canadian visa office, and the officer will then insert this stamp, this counterfoil as it's referred to, and then send the passport back to you. And of course, this can take some time. But then this document essentially indicates that you've met the basic requirements to enter Canada. And of course, you will present that to the officer in your passport when you arrive in Canada. And of course, an ETA, an electronic travel authorization, does exactly the same thing as a visa. The only thing is that you can't see it. It's tied to your passport. So there's been a lot of changes in the last 6 months, or actually a little less than 6 months. In the new year, there's been a lot of changes with immigration to Canada, in particular the International Student Program. Two key changes that have been that have in early in January in 2024 include two things. First of all, there was a significant change to the minimal financial requirements. So for individuals who are applying for study permits as of January 1st and onward, the minimal annual amount for living expenses for an individual has increased. It used to be $10,000, which was really not a true reflection of what the living expenses are in Canada, especially here in Nova Scotia. And that amount, of course, has increased to $2,635 Canadian. So clearly a significant increase. And of course, this is going to impact how you apply for your study permit, because your proof of documentation in terms of funds are now going to be higher. And for those of you who are bringing your children or bringing your spouse or your common law partner, of course, the additional funds that you're going to need to show will increase even further if you're bringing all these individuals in. And please know, this amount here does not include tuition. So essentially, you're looking at this new living expense amount. If you have if you have dependents coming with you, there will be an additional funds there, and of course, tuition. So you need to add that all up in order to demonstrate to immigration that you have significant resources to meet those requirements. Another significant change that has happened is now that all study permit applications, or the majority of them, I should say, now require a provincial attestation letter. Now, initial study permit applications that were submitted after January 2024 will require this. To the majority of students, mostly undergraduates, will now require this provincial attestation letter. Now, there are some exemptions to this. If you're in a master's or a PhD program, you are excluded from the PAL. And of course, there are other eligible individuals that are exempted from this, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So this new provincial attestation letter is now a new process that is required, and the institutions, along with the province of where those institutions reside, work together in order to help you obtain this provincial attestation letter, also referred to as PAL. As Jessica mentioned, saying attestation too many times gets a little tiresome. So as mentioned, as of 2024, provinces and territories now will be issuing these PALs to some groups of international students. And these letters serve as proof that the student has been accounted for under a provincial or a territorial allocation within the national cap. As you probably may have heard, or maybe you haven't heard, the government in early 2024 decided to reduce the number of international applications being processed here in Canada. And of course, that reduction then is then distributed amongst the provinces and the territories here. And every province was then and territory allocated a certain number. So ensuring that that cap is maintained and we are not over issuing study permits, the creation of the PAL was done. And that is why now you require a PAL along with your study permit. So if you do require a PAL, you need to include it in your study permit application when you submit your application to Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada. For full details, because there's a lot of information about the PAL, those who need it and those who don't, I do have a link here that students can visit. And this presentation, by the way, will be available to you to see. So who does need a PAL? So students who fall under these groups listed below require a provincial attestation letter. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. There are some other exemptions as well. And of course, the registrar's office at Acadia can definitely assist you in making that determination. So for the following individuals here, do need to have a provincial attestation letter. So international graduate students whose study permit applications were received. So anything after January 2024, if you're in an undergraduate program and you have yet to submit your application, of course, you're going to be needing a PAL. If you applied before January 22nd, you don't need a PAL and at that point in time. So your application either has already been processed or hopefully being processed very soon. So in addition, most non-degree granting graduate programs, for example, graduate certificate programs, graduate diplomas, international professional programs, all of those sort of types of programs also will be requiring a provincial attestation letter. If you are a visiting student, an exchange student, or a course-based graduate, so if you're coming to Acadia for a short period of time, or maybe you're doing a language program, but the program is longer than 6 months, you're also going to need a provincial attestation letter. And anyone else not included it would be greatly appreciated if you could please mute yourself. Thank you. Anyone else not included in who does not need a provincial attestation exemption list will then be required to have one. If, as I mentioned, if you have any concerns or you're not 100% sure if you do, please reach out to the registrar's office. I believe Jessica has put her email address in the chat and you can contact her for assistance. So how do you request a PAL? Now, there's many students out there who already know that they do have one. At Acadia University, there are 5 easy steps to do that. And it's very straightforward, as you can see here. Step 1, hopefully you've already received your offer letter. And if you have, please submit your offer response form, which is found in your letter of offer. And this is very important because this allows the institution and gives permission to the institution to present this to the provincial government in order for them to release a PAL for you. Of course, you also need to pay your $5,000 deposit. Then you can then submit your provincial attestation letter of consent form, which will be required, as I mentioned. That is required in order for the province then to give that to Acadia. And once that is completed, you will receive your PAL from Acadia via your status portal. And then you can either download it as a digital copy, of course, and include it in your study permit application. And hopefully by the time you reach step 5, your study permit is approved, which is always a time for celebration. And of course, you're going to be joining us at Acadia in the fall of 2024. Of course, if you do run into any issues or any challenges with respect to requesting your PAL, please reach out to the registrar's office immediately and they will assist you. If your application is refused for whatever reason, please contact the International Wong Center for assistance. And of course, just to let you know, your confirmation deposit will be refunded. And if you need additional information on that refund, you can also reach out to the admissions office. And here we go. Does that work? Okay. So when do you apply for your study permit? Well, when you receive the following documents, then you can begin the application process. So essentially, once you get your letter from Acadia that you have been offered and you've approved, and you've accepted the offer to come to Acadia, and you've obtained your provincial attestation letter, and of course, more importantly, you've secured the funding required in order to complete your degree program here at Acadia, then you can begin the study permit application process.
I think that Teresa has technical difficulties.
I
And there
am,
she
and
is.
thank you for your patience. Okay, and we are going to continue on. Great. So some other key considerations to think about when you're applying for your study permit is that if you are in a co-op program or an internship program that is part of your degree program, you should be also applying for your co-op permit at the same time as your study permit. And this will be you will be prompted to this in your online application when you're answering the questions. The other thing that you need to be aware of is when you're applying is that processing times, even though right now it indicates 11 weeks for processing time, those processing times can vary. Students may need to complete a medical exam, a biometrics for sure. And of course, if you require a temporary resident visa, your passport needs to be sent to the Canadian Visa Office and then sent back to you. All of this, of course, takes time. So there could be delays. If you are in that situation where you can be delayed, please let us know as soon as possible, and then we can provide you with some options with respect to that. So if you are in those mandatory co-op programs, whether it's an internship, practicum, field placement, any sort of work integrated learning component, please ensure that you are also applying for that vital work permit. So where to apply? You are going to be ideally applying online. You can also apply through a Canadian Visa Application Center, which is also possible if you are looking to do that in person. For those of you who are American citizens, you can also apply at the port of entry if you are so inclined to. The majority of international students apply online, and we highly recommend that. Is a great process because it ensures that you have a copy of your records of applying, and documentation can be easily added if need be as well. Please note that there are two types of portals that you can utilize to apply for your study permit. Either one is fine, and the information and guidance presented here can be used for both portals. So preparing your application, there's definitely many documents that are required. You should keep in mind that when applying online, you have approximately about 30 days to submit your application before it actually expires. Documents should be ideally PDF documents. If you, for example, you need to show all the pages of your passport that have a signature or a stamp or a picture, you're going to merge these together as a PDF doc, and you just need to ensure that the limit is up to 4 megabytes. So please keep that in mind. All documents, regardless of what they may be, either needs to be in French and English. So if you have, for example, a marriage certificate that you're including because your partner, your spouse is coming with you, that document needs to be translated. It needs to be translated by a certified English translator. In addition, if when applying, when showing proof of financial support, whether it's salaries or scholarships, bank loans, personal loans. It needs to be also shown in Canadian dollars. So if you could provide that currency exchange for the officer, that is greatly appreciated by them. In addition, there will be additional documents that you may also need to include. Now, there could be a letter of explanation if there's a situation that you need further explaining. For example, maybe you're still waiting for your passport to arrive, or maybe you're missing a document and you want to inform the officer of that missing document and that you're going to be updating your application later. That would be an area where you would make that comment under your letter of explanation. The majority of students may not necessarily need a study plan, but it is strongly recommended that you do include a study plan in your application. And that study plan includes why you've chosen Acadia to come here and study, why you've chosen to come to Canada to pursue your degree, why not stay at home, what are your career aspirations, why come here to this country, and how does it support your overall career goals. So this will help the officer understand your intent in coming to Canada, and also fully understand your reasons for coming here and maybe even going back to your home country as well. You may also require a medical exam if you're not sure. The online questionnaire will determine whether you do need a medical exam. Depending on your situation, you may also need to complete a family information form, and those documents are fairly straightforward. Immigration is looking for all of your immediate family members indicated in that form, and that would include, of course, any spouse or common law partner, your mother or your father, and any siblings, and that would be considered your immediate family. A Schedule 1 sometimes may be required, and you will be prompted to complete that form when you are also answering the online questionnaire. Of course, if you happen to be a married student, documents like marriage certificates will be other additional documents. Depending on where you're applying from, certain countries may require additional documentation. If you're not sure, please check the links below on this slide that will take you to the nearest Canadian visa office in your home country, and it will provide you with a list of possible additional documentation to include in your study permit. Once you've completed all the application forms, it's important to make sure that you've looked at it correctly and that there is nothing missing, because anything, even the small things, unfortunately, can have an impact on your application. Make sure that when you do download any form, that you're downloading it from the actual portal of your immigration account, not outside of it. And it's important because these forms are often updated and no one is normally aware of their updates. There's no announcement. And when you do have a new form, the computer system now has been updated to only accept that form. So it's very important that you do access the new forms from your personal account. Make sure that all your forms are completed. Make sure that they're also validated and saved. And a lot of students, I know sometimes they do a lot of changes and then revalidate and save. Ensure that every time you save, that you're giving it a good title. So when you are uploading it, you're uploading the correct form and not maybe the old one. As a good tip as well, it's always a good idea to take screenshots of what you're completing, and this could be valuable for your records later on in case there's any sort of issue. This is just a quick look at what the IMM 1294 looks like. Now, for those of you who apply through the traditional portal or the older portal that would have these types of forms, this is what it would look like. Now, if you're applying through the other portal that has pretty much removed all these forms, but still all of the information from these forms will be required in the other portal as well. So just to let you know, there's also a guide that will be included in this presentation, and it will be submitted to you after this presentation that will help you answer some of the tricky questions of the 1294, including the online questionnaire. So once you've completed the document and you have all your supported documentation, you should be uploading all of your documents, pressing submit, which will then prompt you to pay, of course, a fee. And a good idea at this point in time, after you pay your fee, is to keep a record of your payment and also record of successful transmission. After your application is sent, it could happen that IRCC will contact you. And when they do, they will send you an email prompting you to go to your immigration portal site. And in there is an area of messages where they will send you a message. So it's very important for you to check your email on a regular basis. Sometimes the IRCC email can end up in the junk file. So please make sure that you check it there as well. Normally, if officers do contact you, they're looking for additional documentation, and that additional documentation usually is very time sensitive, and they usually give you sometimes about 5 to 7 days. And if it's not met within that period of time, you can rest assured that the application will be not approved. It will be rejected, unfortunately. Okay. So for those of you who are able to apply through direct stream, and you're probably wondering what direct stream is, it's a faster application process, but does require different documentation. For those of you who may be interested to see whether your country is part of this program, please check the website below. Individuals who are eligible can apply through the the student direct stream, and this does expedite the application process, provided, of course, that all the eligibility requirements are met. Some of the key requirements that are required in this application process is full year's tuition payment, and also language test requirement will be used for that. So if you want additional information, please visit the website link below. So after you apply, you will be receiving notification regarding a biometric. Now, everyone needs to have a biometric, and the only individuals that are exempt in this are US citizens. But the majority of you, of course, will all be completing your biometric. What is a biometric? Essentially, you're having your photo and your fingerprints scanned, and this will be done at a local processing center. Hopefully there's one in your area. If not, this may require some extra travel. So immigration will prompt you to complete your biometric. Within your study permit application package, you will have already had paid the $85. Just be mindful of that, not to pay again. Applicants, of course, may also be required to do a medical exam or maybe even provide a police certificate. So be mindful of that, and that once again, you will be notified by RCC in your email prompting you to go into your immigration account. Just a few note about processing times and delays. As I mentioned earlier, processing times can be long depending on the application, or if something is missing or something is not quite clear for the officer. So there could be delays. And delays, of course, can impact your ability to arrive on time and start classes, and of course, student orientation, which is very important to attend. Now, if I'm not mistaken, classes begin on September 4th for the fall of 2024. If you find yourself in this sort of predicament, it would be greatly appreciated if you contact the admissions office, and the email address is there for information regarding referrals. If you wish to request a referral, you can also do so through your Acadia status portal, or of course you can just email. If you have academic inquiries, also, if you are in this situation, you can also contact your academic department or faculty for guidance on your program. Okay, just not. So getting your study permit. So if your study permit is approved, which I hope it will be, you will receive a letter. So you will receive an email prompting you to go to your immigration portal. And in there will be a message and a letter. And the letter is officially called a letter of introduction. And it is a letter that you will indicate that you have been approved for a study permit. It'll also provide you with some additional information on when it was processed, how long it will be issued for, and you will then present this letter. In the letter itself, it'll tell you to prompt you to present to the Canadian border officer when you first arrive in Canada. And for those of you who applied for a co-op permit or an internship permit, you will also receive a letter of approval. And that letter you will once again also present to the Canadian Border Services officer, who will actually then issue the actual study permit and your co-op work permit. And a good tip, when you get that, it's always good to look at your documents before leaving the officer, ensuring that everything is there, there's no spelling mistakes, and countries of origin are all there. And of course, those critical working conditions are listed on your study permit. Okay, and this is what the letter of introduction looks like. As you can see, it's got your name, it's got a UCI number. That number will follow you for wherever you go, and it will never change. It's kind of like your Acadia student ID. And as you can see, the first sentence it indicates is that your study permit has been approved, so which is always a welcome sight. So this is what your letter of introduction is. This is an extremely important letter. Do not delete it. Don't get rid of your email address. Get rid of it. Don't delete it. It is vital to have this letter. Without it, you will not receive your study permit or your work permit. So when you are arriving in Canada, this is what we recommend that you present, of course, is your letter of introduction, also called a port of entry letter. It's also a good idea to show your Acadia University letter of acceptance, your provincial attestation letter, if that is applicable, your proof of finances, ideally what you submitted in your application, and if you can have them updated, that would be even better. If you happen to be registered for your courses, even obtaining a confirmation of registration letter would be ideal. Not necessarily required, but if you are registered, you can obtain that letter. As I mentioned, you will receive this letter when you first arrive in Canada. It's not when you arrive at the Halifax airport. It will be unless of course you do have a direct flight into Halifax, you will receive it at your first landing. So it could be either Toronto or Montreal or maybe even Vancouver. Okay. Just as a tip there, sometimes, of course, you then need to take your connecting flight. Ensure that you have plenty of time between connecting flights. Usually at the end of August and early September, there's a large volume of international student travelers at our major airports here in Canada. The processing of foreign nationals coming through immigration can take time, so it's always a good idea to give yourself a couple of hours, quite a few hours between your connecting flights. Okay. And lastly, as I mentioned, it's a good tip just to make sure that all of your documentation is correct. And if there's any issues at all, this is the good time to notify the officer when you're there, as opposed to later on, which it takes a lot of time to have these conditions amended after the fact. And just to let you know, if you're looking at your working conditions, these are the conditions that you would be looking at. So if you don't find this on your study permit and you are been admitted into a degree program at Acadia, you should have one of these in your study permit. If not, talk to the officer. And working in Canada, just to let you know, that study permit, as I mentioned earlier, does act like a work permit, provided those conditions are there, provided that you are also registered as a full-time student. You are allowed to work 20 hours a week off campus as of now, and of course, unlimited on campus. And of course, if you're an undergraduate student, you may have a summer scheduled break, which you are allowed then to work more than 20 hours a week. And working in Canada, for those of you in programs that require work integrated learning component, you do require a special work permit, which is called a co-op internship permit. If you are in a mandatory program that requires one, hopefully you will be applying for that when you apply for your study permit application. Now, here are some frequently asked questions that students have asked. Can you apply for a study permit with a conditional acceptance letter? Yes, you can. Even if an offer of admission conditions you can still have left to complete, you can still use your conditional letter of acceptance for your study permit application. We don't recommend that you wait. You should apply. However, you do need to provide additional documentation to prove that you are going to meet those conditions or that you've already met those prerequisite conditions. If you require any assistance with this, please do let us know. How much money do I need to show? As I mentioned earlier, it's the amount per person for living expenses has increased to $20,635 Canadian. So being mindful of that, you do need to show that you can not only pay tuition, but have enough for living expenses for at least that year. But the officer will be looking for more long-term financial resources, and you will need to be able to show that. So if you're want to see what your first year tuition is, it would be indicated in your letter. If not, you can check at the registrar's office or the admissions office who can help you with that. As I mentioned earlier, the minimum for one person is $20,635. If you do have any additional individuals coming with you, dependents, there will be additional funds, and there's a link here that will take you to a chart that provides you with additional information on how much additional funds you will be required to do. Okay, here are some examples of how you can show financial support. We get questions about this all the time, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea. So, of course, your letter from Acadia, if you've received any scholarships, any financial aid, teaching assistantships, research assistantships, of course, bank statements, whether they are from your sponsor, your parents, or yourselves, either from a Canadian bank account or an overseas bank. Proof of employment, whether it's from yourself, maybe you've saved over the years, maybe it's support from your parents or your sponsor, a parental letter of financial support, a declaration. Many students are being supported by their parents. Having this sort of declaration or letter of support is ideal, which also then would include, of course, information regarding that source of funding, which would normally be an employment letter as well. Or, of course, if your family member who is supporting you has their own business, they would be showing proof of ownership for that. Approval of an educational bank loan, whether it's a private loan or through a bank. Ownership of property, whether it's yourself or your sponsor or your parents. Any other type of income, whether it's passive income such as stock or dividends, whether it's from yourself, your sponsor, or your parents. Lastly, with respect to finances, it's always good when you are preparing your financial documentation to prepare a spreadsheet for the officer, and it makes it very easy for them to see what sources of income you have, the type of documentation that you have provided them, the amounts, of course, in your currency, and the converted currency that you're going to be providing them for them. This makes them very easy for them to understand what sources of support that you have. If you happen to be 18 or 17, there's many students who are concerned about whether they need a custodian or a guardian for their study permit application. And just to let you know, needing a custodian is only mandatory if you are 16 and under, or younger than that. So if you are not under 16, and if you're 17 or 18, according to immigration, it is discretionary for the officer to determine whether you need a custodian or not. And what we advise in order to help support not needing a custodian, because it can be difficult getting one, Acadia strongly recommends that you live in residence. It's a fantastic place to live, especially for your first year. And we then recommend that you apply to live, get approval, and use that document, your letter of approval from Residence Life, to submit with your study permit application. And hopefully this will provide sufficient support to the officer that you're living in an environment that is very much conducive to an environment in which you're getting 24/7 support, in which you are in this case. Lastly, can my spouse and or common law partner or child apply with me? Absolutely, they can come and apply with you. In your online questionnaire, it will prompt you whether you want to include a family member, and this is where you would indicate yes. Please note that there are some additional changes that have been made to students who do bring their family members. If you are in an undergraduate program, unless you are in a professional program, your common law partner or your spouse may not be eligible for an open work permit. If you have any questions about that eligibility and whether your partner would be eligible for one, please let us know. Contact the Wong Center and we'll be able to advise you appropriately. What should I do if my study permit is refused? Well, of course, please contact us as soon as possible, and we'll try to provide the best support as we can for you. If you are experiencing any issues with applying for the PAL, paying for your deposit, or you're not sure whether you're a PAL exempt, definitely there's assistance here to help you. Contact the admissions office at admissions@acadiau.ca for details regarding, and please provide details regarding the situation. Okay, here are some really good, helpful websites for you. There is, of course, the detailed process online for immigration. The student direct stream also is there for you to look at, processing times. And of course, IRCC has now added a new application tracker, so you can monitor your study permit application while you are waiting. So hopefully that will be very helpful for students. Lastly, if you do need help and support, whether it's immigration or you have other questions in coming to Acadia, please do let us know. You can contact us, go through our website, you can email us. Of course, you can always call us as well. And now that concludes our session, and we're going to open it up to the floor. If you have any questions,